In this presentation, we're going to discuss public policy and politics. What is public policy? Um, uh, we're going to define some concepts. We're going to talk about the context of public policy and the reasons for government involvement. I'd like to start with a quick example. Every year, people visit amusement parks for fun, but some get injured in doing so. Some even die. What kinds of controls or regulations are in place to ensure individuals are safe in amusement parks? Different policy areas are regulated by different entities. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission regulates traveling rides. Permanent rides are up to the states to regulate. Some states require more inspections than others. Should we be concerned by the number of people hurt on amusement park rides? Policy analysts can help determine this. If a lot of people are being hurt in amusement parks, then perhaps there's a regulation or some kind of requirement that can be made to prevent injuries. If it's a small number of people and usually it's an individual problem, where that individual acted wrongly, then maybe this isn't an area that we need to be that concerned with. This example helps show how public policy and government impact things we don't consider. Public policy making is important. It involves many different institutions, people, and groups. A complex policy issue is ideally resolved only through long hours of research and debate that considers the underlying beliefs and assumptions as well as pertinent facts. But sometimes issues are not resolved and they arise again. And one other reason why I use this as an example is because, as you can see here from the headline in the Washington Post, back in 2015, teacher killed by Cedar Point roller coaster, and the quote from a family member or friend was, "He'd just gotten a dream job." Well, as somebody working their dream job right now, as an assistant professor of political science at an institution I really care about, and having been born in Sandusky, I can say that I don't want to get hit by a roller coaster after getting my dream job. That would be really unfortunate. I believe this person actually jumped a fence that they weren't supposed to jump to retrieve something that they lost on the ride. Bad idea. Not much you can do regulation-wise, I don't think, to prevent that. But it's a bad idea. If you lose something on a roller coaster, a staff member can retrieve it for you when the park is closed. Anyway, what is public policy? Public policy is what public officials within government, and by extension the citizens they represent, choose to do or not do about public problems. Public problems are those conditions the public widely perceives as unacceptable and therefore require intervention. Policy is a purposive course of action that an individual or group consistently follows in dealing with a problem. So these can include laws, executive orders, regulations, or judicial rulings. And as we'll talk about later in the semester, how we define the problem helps us get to what we believe will be the solution. And recognizing that something is a problem is a big part of the need for public policy. If we don't see something as a problem, then we don't really need a public policy to resolve that problem. So, in our roller coaster example, if we don't have a lot of injuries on roller coasters throughout the country, then it's probably not something we need to worry about creating more regulation and rules about. If a lot of people are being injured, then perhaps it's something that needs to be analyzed and some kind of solution has to be proposed to cut down on those injuries. So let's define some concepts. Government. Government consists of the institutions and political processes through which public policy choices are made. I know some of these definitions, um, do you really need a definition for government? Maybe, maybe not, but I like to give clear definitions of these concepts so we don't take anything for granted. Politics, the exercise of power in society or in specific decisions over policy making. It's informally, politics is about who gets what, when, and how. Policy analysis is the examination of the components of public policy, the policy process, or both. The study of the causes and consequences of policy decisions. What is the impact of right to work on unemployment? What is the impact of right to work on wages? We have a lot of policy analysis that helps us decide what does this policy do, what effect does this policy have. And so we'll be discussing that in specific contexts throughout the semester. And speaking of context, that public policy exists in a lot of different contexts. So there's social context. This includes our demographic context. Policy implications of senior citizens making up such a large part of the population would be part of a social context. So we have an aging population and a large bubble at the top of people, say, 65 and over. What does that do? Well, that certainly puts a lot of stress on things like Social Security, where money from our paychecks of the people that are working goes in to fund Social Security to then cut a Social Security check for the elderly, and having a large number of people that are receiving Social Security and a smaller group of people that are working to pay into Social Security creates a policy problem. What the solution to that policy problem is very much up to debate, but we have implications that are demographic and have a social context. Economic context also plays a role. A strong economy, what does that mean to have a strong economy? We have a lot of different economic measures for what a strong economy is. Is it how well the stock market is doing, or is it unemployment, or how do we measure a good economy? And there's a number of different ways to do that, but there's probably no one measure that defines how strong an economy is. So lower unemployment and less need for unemployment benefits in a strong economy would have an economic effect. And in weaker economies, you might be looking at policies that help people gain access to job training programs if you have high unemployment, to try and cut down on unemployment. There's political context, of course. So Democrats and Republicans hold sharply different views about the role of government. And that definitely plays a role. How involved should government be in trying to solve policy problems? And even when Democrats and Republicans believe that government involvement is necessary, because of their views of the role of government, they come to different solutions. Then there's governing context. So politically, when we're talking on the campaign trail and proposing solutions to poverty, unemployment, gun violence, whatever it is, there's a political context there that we have sharply different views and different ideologies that come to different decisions on what to do, but then there's also the realities of governing that people in political power have to deal with. And what I mean by that is separation of powers. So separation of powers can shape public policy in the way that, when the president makes an executive order, they don't have total control over the policy that ends up being created, because the courts could strike down that executive order as unconstitutional if it's not written within the scope of the presidency, within the scope of the president's powers. Federalism. Federalism also plays a role. That's state governors and state legislatures have some power over a lot of power over how they govern themselves, and there's only so much that the national government can or will. I guess they can theoretically do a lot of things about state power, but mostly the federal government is limited in how much they can impose on the states. So you have to deal with issues of federalism. You have drugs that are illegal at the federal level that states have decided to legalize, and the federal government has decided to do not a whole lot about that. So there's governing context. And then there's cultural context. This refers to the widely held beliefs, values, attitudes such as trust and confidence in government and the political process. So we culturally, we face policy issues in a different way, depending on the region that we live in, or our economic background, or demographics, race, gender. That all plays a role. It's part of social context too, but those values, beliefs, attitudes that are shaped by who we are and our background and our experience helps shape the context of public policy. Now let's talk a little bit about the reasons for government involvement. So there are political reasons. Change in public opinion. If the public becomes very aware of an issue, then the government and politicians are going to change their focus to think about how to fix that issue. And so a good example historically is the civil rights movement. Civil rights was not originally a very salient issue. It wasn't something that was on Americans' minds. And then protests throughout the 50s made more Americans aware of racial injustices and helped lead to the Civil Rights Act. So a change in public opinion on issues, change in public opinion on the Vietnam War helped end up pulling troops out of Vietnam. So public opinion can be a force for public policy. There are moral reasons. So government action can sometimes be seen as the right thing to do, even without public pressure. So funding Social Security, although there would be a lot of public pressure for that. And different there are different moral reasons for public policy action. A lot of times that is part of the justification that not only is this an effective policy, or maybe we don't even know if it's a really effective policy, but it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for our environment, or it's the right thing to do for our personal freedoms and individual liberty and the values that America stands for. Those kinds of things, and that can come from a liberal or conservative standpoint when you make a moral reasoning argument. Economic or market failures. So a market failure is when the private market is not efficient. So examples would be like creating a monopoly. When the private market is not efficient, and it doesn't create competition, you end up with monopolies. The government interferes and breaks up monopolies to maintain competition for goods and services. Externalities like positive and negative externalities. These are when a third party is impacted by something that they're not when they're not part of the transaction. So a negative externality is when two parties interact with each other, and the result of the interaction is that a third party is harmed and does not get compensation. So, as you can see from the picture, maybe pollution would be part of this. You're not buying the good made by the factory that creates the pollution. You don't get the benefit of the good that's made from the factory that is polluting the air, but you have to breathe the air. So that's a common example of a negative externality. There are also positive externalities when a third party is positively impacted by an exchange made by two parties in the marketplace. So, as an example, education. If you may not have children in school, um, but uh, uh, we all benefit from an educated society, and an educated population, and we want our citizens to be able to read and write and use critical thinking, and that benefits society as a whole, whether you're involved in that exchange or not. And there are also information failures. So when parties cannot adjust their involvement in an interaction based on information that they do not have. So, so you can't decide to not take a prescription drug that is unsafe unless you know that it's unsafe. So we have regulations and things like the FDA to try and help decide what is safe and what is not safe. Uh, so that is an introduction to public policy and politics. What is public policy? Some context of public policy and reasons for government involvement. Again, these things um, uh, these things are all impacted by politics and ideology and our values, and this makes us come to different conclusions because of our reasoning and our ideology and our background and all of the context we've talked about here. So, thank you.